Hi, Dustin.
Hi,
How are
what's
you?
up? I'm good. How are you?
Okay. So my first question is, I want to know how you got into music because I understand you had a band in high school.
Yes. Yeah, I got into music. Well, I feel like I was born into music in terms of being interested in it and captivated and fascinated by it. Um, but I didn't start playing an instrument until I heard a friend's band, and they were three brothers, and they had a band in their basement, and they wrote their own songs, and and it was just this moment of feeling like, oh wow, people like I could do this, like they can do this, and so could I. And I asked them if I could join them, and they said yes if I could get it together. And then I literally went in the attic of my parents' house and found my dad's old guitar,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, and obsessively practiced, and I haven't stopped obsessively practicing to this day.
That's great. So tell me how you got into flamenco music because that's a new passion of yours.
Yeah, the flamenco music was an accident. I was not. I feel like I probably wouldn't have thought it possible to take it on because it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do with the guitar. Um, but I was just studying Spanish and watching films in Spanish, and I watched a documentary about Camarón de la Isla, who's this um, flamenco hero, and I heard this music, and I just was totally captivated, and I got in touch with a friend who's a singer, and she actually told me that her guitarist was going to leave town, and if I could really get competent at playing flamenco guitar, that I could have a gig with her, which which put the fire under myself, as it
Now you went to Spain, right? In the
yeah,
last year or before the
yeah,
pandemic?
right before the pandemic. I was in Spain when they made that when the then president made that announcement that people wouldn't be able to come back to the U.S. And I thought about not coming back, but I have a really amazing partner that I live with in Brooklyn. And the thought of not seeing her for that long was terrible. So I got on a flight and came.
So you mentioned to me that flamenco is not just about the music that you're intrigued about.
Yeah, there. This was an overwhelming experience I had in Spain, which was just realizing that all this stuff about how they're playing the guitar, which is so incredible and intricate and requires all these really bizarre, physically bizarre techniques, like hitting strings with each finger like this,
Oh, wow.
and all these things that I've been training my hand to do. And when I got there, I realized, like, oh, they're just trying to do with their fingers what the dancer is doing with their feet, because that's how to play with the dancer. Like, the dancer necessitates these techniques,
Huh.
and the loudness of the guitarists, like the guitarists are incredibly impressively loud, and it's also because they're playing without amplification with this dancer who's stomping on a hollow stage, and the singers also sing incredibly loudly. And the flamenco guitarists have this incredible ability to accompany a melody by listening, and the melodies don't fit like um, a form in terms of X amount of beats per note or per lyric, like we're used to in Western song music. And the guitarist has to hear where the next chord belongs based on what the singer is doing. And the singer is playing with their phrasing. They might repeat a line, they might hold out one note, over the course of 3 bars. So there's all these like phrases of 5 bars, phrases of 7 bars, and you have to create the feeling of resolution no matter where the singer is. And it's such a cool skill, especially to me as a jazz musician accompanying saxophone players and improvising with them. Like that kind of ear of hearing resolution where it's demanded by somebody who doesn't understand harmony and who is really just thinking about what they're doing. I don't know, it just, all the things that I'm trying to learn how to do, I realize they're necessitated by the role of the guitar as an accompanying instrument.
Huh. There's so much of what you just said in the duo that you wrote for us. Like some places where I'm bending the harmonies through a single note and you're following. I can, like, I looked at the video and watching you, you're like listening to bend with me, and also that beautiful rhapsodic section that makes me think of Spanish nights, and I love that. But also there's that solo violin cadenza which sounds Bach-like.
Yeah,
Right? So you incorporated a lot of flavors.
absolutely. Yeah. I named the piece after we recorded it, but I named it Short Myths in Many Tongues. And it's really that kind of a musical thing. Like it's touching on all these different influences that I feel have been my education in music, sort of a self-curated education. I like to say I'm not self-taught, but self-curated.
I like that.
Yeah. I feel like that's more honest. Nobody's self-taught, like music existed before anyone got born.
Well, our mutual friend, Gabriela Lena once said in a class that she came to visit, one of my classes by Zoom, she was talking to one of my students, and she was saying, once you leave the university, you become the university of yourself. And as you leave the institutions where you study, that university of yourself becomes more and more important. And so what I'm thinking, like what you're talking about, really, you're embodying all the things that you've accumulated, knowledge that you've accumulated or are experiencing, and incorporating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's just a matter of like, with working on the piece, it's just a matter of like, okay, the piece comes to a place where I could hear a violin solo. And then my reference to a violin solo that I felt confident would be in your language was what I came up with, which has this Bach influence, because I know that you're a very strong classical violinist,
You wrote that so well for the violin that I wondered if you had played the violin. I mean, it lays so well for the instrument.
Wow.
And
I picked up a violin once and touched the bow to the string and made the terrible and put it down and thought, wow, I'm never gonna try that again. But I have played a lot of the Bach sonatas and partitas on guitar. So I feel like that's my clue into like how a chord rolls off of the violin and how it could be voiced. That would be something that would be manageable to play, I guess.
So one of the things that we talked about when you first were starting to write this piece, we were talking about a theme, and you mentioned language or misinterpretations of language or misunderstandings.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about this question because it's very much on my mind, and I feel like often when I talk about it, I go all over the place because it's so on my mind. But I feel like this piece reflects something that was happening to me as a result of studying language, and specifically studying Spanish, but I also study Polish. And it's this feeling of every every day that I study a language, I feel like my perspective is broader because I'm able to be informed by speakers of that language. So like I'm learning flamenco from people who speak Spanish, and I wouldn't be able to learn from them if I didn't speak Spanish.
Mm.
And I like to read the newspaper in New York in Spanish because it's a good reading level for me. And it's a perspective
Wow.
that it's just a perspective that I wouldn't get. And I'm aware of that. And it's exciting to me that like, okay, this is really opening my mind and my perspective. And the piece is kind of doing that in a way because it's a multilingual, like a multi-musical language piece. Like there's flamenco, there's Bach, there's jazz music, there's the textures that I got into from improvising. And what I like about music is able to be expansive and be open to multiple languages or multiple philosophies. And you can create by being expansive, like and this sort of social issue that we were talking about at the beginning of me writing the piece was that I was feeling sort of a caving in of communication and language, because in the pandemic, so many people were communicating through social media specifically. And I just feel like social media, unlike music, is this thing that like compresses communication, and it really turns it, in my mind, it turns it into advertisement, and everybody's just making an advertisement for their breakfast or for their or for the fact that they make music at all, or for for the fact that they whatever. And I just feel like psychologically, what is that doing to everybody if we're thinking like, how do I advertise my delicious cup of coffee that I'm just drinking, as opposed to just drinking the coffee.
That's true. The importance of where you got that coffee looms larger than it needs to be, right?
Yeah,
And then the larger topics get minimalized.
absolutely. And it's very easy to become complacent in it.
Mm-hmm.
which I was troubled with during the pandemic, that many of my peers were sort of rushing to be like, look at this amazing piece I wrote on Instagram, and come to my live stream thing, and let's be plugged in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand, like, we want to be heard and we want to be relevant, and if we can't gather in spaces, performers don't feel heard and relevant, and that's painful. But my feeling when we first started to talk about this phenomenon was really frustrated. I was really frustrated with people using music to get everyone more plugged in and more advertising and more like social media.
There's a saturation of content.
Yeah.
Also. And then also the groupthink becomes very powerful, and we kind of lose our individual thought. It's harder to, right, to separate.
Absolutely.
So that's interesting. One of our mutual friends is definitely not a groupthink person who really believes in things and really lives by what she believes, and that's Gabriela Lena Frank.
Absolutely, yeah. Gabby is really somebody who puts her money / her whole her whole way of being where her mouth is. You know, she's a high integrity leader, I guess. She's the real deal. That's probably the only phrase I could come up with.
So one of the initiatives that she started is something in terms of climate change and awareness. And I know you're involved in that tremendous project. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I will try to say just a little bit because it's very exciting and there's a lot to say. But essentially, there's a handful of composers that have done the GlyphCam fellowship, and we're all meeting monthly with Gabby, and soon we'll also be meeting with a climate scientist, and we're getting educated about climate change, essentially. And the long goal is to write music that takes this information into itself and expresses something about the situation that we're in, which is a humongous sort of concept or sea of concepts. And right now, I feel like for myself, I'm at the stage in the process where I'm starting to know how I feel about the issue, not necessarily how I feel about how music has something to do with it. But it is very exciting and, in a sense, calming to be educating myself about this, because, you know, the truth is an easier thing to walk around knowing or thinking about or trying to know than kind of this complacent consumer situation that we're kind of led to be in, you know. All of our systems as humans, especially in the USA, are predicated upon consuming way too much and destroying the natural systems of the planet. And you can't really live in a city like I live in Brooklyn and not be part of the problem. So I think for some people it's uncomfortable to learn about this stuff, but I actually find it to be calming. Like,
so it's like a 2-year process, right? The first year is about being educated.
Yeah, the first year is education. So we're reading about a book a month and watching about 2 or 3 documentaries, 2 or 3 documentaries a month, and meeting and discussing them with each other. And people are doing their own independent study also.
And then the second year, you'll be composing a work.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It is exciting. Yeah.
Do you like composing with something in mind like that?
You know, it's a thing that I used to think that music was just for music, and I kind of hated the idea that you would compose for something, or like my music says this kind of paradigm. And actually, when I went to Spain, I realized that I needed a new definition of what music is. And for me right now, music is defined as sound plus culture. And so if music is sound plus culture, then it's like, well, what culture am I participating in? You know? So if I'm a climate science or climate composer, if I'm in the climate awareness culture and I'm composing from that place, that seems like an exciting and healthy place.
It's interesting. Sometimes people listen to music just for the sake of listening to music. And sometimes people want to find out, what is this piece about? And
Yeah,
sometimes it's just because it's a beautiful melody, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think it always expresses something about culture, even when people say that they don't want to know anything about it or hear the words about it because they're limited. I'm definitely of the mindset that I want to hear the music before I know anything about it, because I want to, music definitely stirs things in my consciousness that words can't.
It's like going to
And
the museum and seeing a painting and not putting on the acoustic guide and finding out all about it before seeing the picture.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I mean, what's most powerful about music is how it speaks to the individual when they first listen to it, right?
Yeah.
And I think if it evokes a strong emotion, it's an effective piece, even if it's, I hate it or I love it. I think it's more
Yeah.
deadly if it's it's a pretty nice piece. That's
Yeah. I
that's not as
always
impactful.
I always feel like the things that get me are if I'm interested and intrigued, but I actually can't figure out exactly quite why. Then I have to go back and listen again. And I feel like with music, if I understand it the first time I hear it completely, it might be a good piece, but I'm not going to listen to it again
Mm-hmm.
because I got it.
But you're right about the culture thing, because we're all amalgamation of lots of different things,
Absolutely.
experiences and cultures that we're exposed to, and I'm sure as a composer, it all ends up. I mean, I hear it even in this duo that you wrote, that it encompasses so many different flavors. I love it. It's really what has been exciting to learn. It's taught me
Yeah.
a lot, actually. It's taught me a lot as a musician, because um, uh, it's I had to kind of go through different worlds or get into grooves instead of doing my traditional kind of classical training, counting things carefully, and
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
it was very freeing.
And you even improvised on it.
A little bit.
Awesome.
So what new projects do you have coming up?
So I'm finishing a record with this band called Secret People, which is myself playing electric guitars, Kate Gentile playing drums and vibraphone, and Nathaniel Morgan is playing alto saxophone, and it's a co-composed set of music. It's going to come out on Out of Your Head Records sometime, I think, this year.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
How do you compose something together? Like, do you end up having arguments about, I want this piece to go this way?
Really, this band is the only band like it, as far as I'm aware. Because some of the music I've been playing with Kate, the drummer, since we were roommates 8 or 9 years ago, and we played it back then. Then we added Nathaniel to the band maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then we would do things like Kate would write a bunch of rhythms, and I would take pitches from a different piece that we play together and rearrange them into chords to fit her rhythms, and all kinds of things like that. Nathaniel is really aware of like pitch class sets, and he came up with some really interesting collections of pitches that we would then write with, and that's just what gets put on paper. But then there's this whole process of playing the stuff that's on paper and saying, okay, for the opening of the piece, why don't we play this part but only play random selection of each note and just hold them out as like a long pitch. And there's just countless examples of stuff like that.
Wow. I look forward to hearing it. Sounds
Cool.
really interesting.
yeah, I'm excited about it. I like it a lot. I like the record.
Well, this was great. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, lovely to talk with you too.
And I'm really glad we got to have this conversation.
Yeah. Also lovely to play the piece with you.
Thank you, Dustin.